Pioneering surf parks took 10 years to go from pipe dream to paying customers. 10 years! How can digging a hole, filling it with water, agitating that water, and asking people for money be so incredibly complicated? Today's wave pool projects get done on a much shorter timeline, thanks to lessons learned from those early adopters in the space. In Wave Pool Mag sessions, we hear from the brightest minds in the business. Everything's on the table topic-wise, from choosing a tech provider to maximizing food and beverage revenue, and more. So join us for Wave Pool Mag sessions.
Guests today are Marshall Merriman of Flowsurf, Wes Long of Stargard Elite, and Sean Hutchinson of Urbansurf. And we're going to talk about surf park safety standards. But first, to get some background, Marshall is a La Jolla local who worked for Tom Lochtefeld running the Flowrider Sheetwave business and now heads Flowsurf as a division of Whitewater. Sean Hutchinson is Group Operations Manager at Urbansurf and has extensive experience in the water park business, both in Australia and the Middle East. Urbansurf has recently partnered with Stargard Elite to streamline safety protocols at their wave pools, both in Melbourne and Sydney. Wes Long is the president of Stargard Elite, a company providing safety training programs and advisory services to more than 350 clients worldwide. Additionally, Wes is very active throughout the industry and currently serves on the World Water Park Association's board of directors. The CMAHC for lifeguarding, bather supervision, drowning prevention, a whole bunch of stuff. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Nice having you here.
And before we start, just a reminder, the audience, you're muted. There's a little chat icon. You're able to log in, ask a few questions. We'll have a question and answer period in about 45 minutes, so hang on. If you have to cut out early for some reason, you can leave your question in the chat, and we'll see if we have time to get to it. Right now for wave pools and surf parks, is there a universal standard? And anyone can take this question. Anyone, Sean, Wes, Marshall, do you want to bring us up to speed?
Best place for this answer.
Sure. So the short answer to the question is simply no. There's not a universal standard for surf parks. And that's one of the things that I think we're in the process of, as an industry, figuring out and evolving to what is the right standard and best practices that should be used at surf parks, because we know they're different than natural surf environments, and surf life saving. A lot of what we do in surf environments would apply. A lot of what we do in water parks would apply, but we can't operate surf parks like water parks, and nor can we operate them like surf life saving. And so we have to find this nice hybrid model, and that's really kind of what we're setting out to do, using partnering with Urbansurf and others in this space about what does that look like. And when we talk about surf parks and the next steps from a safety and best practices, if we pretend we have all the answers today, we don't. We're going to learn some of these things along the way, but we have a really good idea, taking the best from both the natural environments, the current water, aquatic activity, sports environments and such, and trying to collaborate with others in this space to build that standard. And I'll let Sean or Marshall, of course, they probably have their own thoughts to it.
Well, I think
Marshall,
I would say
jump.
Go for it, Marshall. Off you go.
So about, 10, 12 years ago, Tom encouraged me to get involved in ASTM because he had heard that they were going to create a standard within F24 for stationary waves. So I went to the first meeting and they were trying to pigeonhole a water slide standard into stationary waves. And it was all wrong. And at the end of the meeting, they asked me if I wanted to chair the committee. So be careful what you ask for, right? So the long and short is that we did create a standard specifically for stationary wave systems. And that continues it got passed in 2017. It continues to evolve to include all kinds of different types of stationary waves, including deep flow river waves and derivatives. Then about 3 years ago, Gerald Kubiak, who is one of the principal engineering guys at Slater Wave Company, might have been I think it was actually pre-COVID. He came to me and said, "Hey, we should do something for this for surf pools." And I said, "Sure, go for it." So anyhow, the long and short of that is that he and Tom Lochtefeld and myself and Tom's son Rainey have been working over the last 2.5 years with a committee within ASTM to build out a standard for what's called surf lagoons, because nobody wanted to use the term pool, and so on and so forth. So anyhow, there was a standard proposed that went to ballot this summer, and if you've ever been involved, it's a long, arduous process, and you have to deal with negative voters and all kinds of comments. So obviously it got reached. Nobody expected it to pass, but we got a significant amount of commentary from academics and operators. It's a diverse group that's in ASTM. And so we rehabilitated it, and it's going to go to ballot again. Now, this is just kind of like one part of it, but we did try to get as many people involved in the industry as possible. There's representatives from Wavegarden, Endless Surf, Slater Wave Company, Surf Loch. It's a group of manufacturers, and that is very consistent with what ASTM is about. It's about the manufacturers and the operators and the insurance risk people and the lawyers all coming together to work on something, and it's all on the basis of safety. So that's kind of where that sits right now.
Now, so stationary waves, rapid waves have a set of standards, safety standards that are applied to every time you open up, say, a city wave or a flow surf. You're going to have to adhere to these regulations at your venue, correct?
Yeah, it's not so much regulations as it is a specific guideline for a manufacturer on how to make sure that their attraction is safe, and then specifically how what they do is handed off to the operator to make sure the operator operates it in a safe manner. I'm sure, Sean, the manufacturer of your surf pool has specific guidelines that you need to adhere to, right? I mean, so it's really all built out from what I would say the designer engineer viewpoint, and then specifically within ASTM, there's also a bunch of different. There's a huge envelope of a body of work that's been done, and a large body of that work is around what's called F770, and that's the operator and its operators' responsibilities. So let's say a manufacturer hands off a completely documented package, this, that, everything's perfect. They do the training, and then the operator goes rogue and operates in an unsafe manner, then it's their responsibility, So there are some lines of demarcation there.
Okay. Now, can we see in a real world scenario how this is applied to Sean at Urbansurf? What are you doing in line with the safety standards set forth by Wavegarden or Melbourne or Future in Sydney? Explain to us how that works and what it is that you're doing.
Sure. So absolutely, Wavegarden did give us safety standards, but it was more on how to operate the machine. So this is an e-stop. Make sure your e-stop's close. Generic. Make sure your water levels are a certain high level. If there's lightning, out of the way. and then how to operate the machine and the safety standards behind the machine itself. That was a component. And then the lifeguarding and how to manage people was mostly left to us. And I mean, we were one of the first with their new lagoon. So we fully expected to kind of work with them on it and create standards ourselves. And then from an Australian point of view, the government insisted that we were a swimming pool for water quality standards. And then, but the flow on from calling us a pool meant we had to lifeguard it like a pool and see where we fit in and where we didn't. So again, just like we've all said, we didn't really fit in one single box. Like, it is absolutely a hybrid that we've made. And we have struggled, and there's been a lot of learnings, and we've tried to get as close to as many current standards as possible, knowing that we don't meet all the standards, but where we don't meet all the standards, we use a lot of data, and we use third party people to work with us and kind of sign it off. And kind of that's where Wes and Stargard Elite kicks in. Is we've struggled in Australia. I know that the Wave has had their own struggles, and if there is this international standard that comes out of this, everybody moving forward should just have an easier time. It shouldn't need to be this difficult for everybody opening a new surf park.
Okay. You know, I think one of the things that both Marshall and Sean hit on, when we talk about safety standards, there's a lot of people view it in a lot of different ways. You know, there's the safety standards of the design, the build, you know, development of the physical facility. There's the water quality and water systems and treatment and all of the health, the bather health side of things. But then and those are pretty well documented, although there's definitely things that surf parks and surf venues in general are unique to almost anything else and how they do both of those. But then you also have that operational component, and some of that comes from the manufacturer, the tech provider, or whoever. But then some of that is honestly derived by the actual people running it to determine what they're doing. And that's one of the things that I love about like what I've seen with Urbansurf is they've kind of, what are those gaps? What are those missing pieces that ultimately from that customer and experience piece of it, you know, when they get in the water, the introduction, the education, all of the practices, the emergency response protocol, all these layers fall into this that you need to have. And so, and that's what's very much still, I think, being built. But it's really tricky because some people, they're very focused on the water quality. Some are focused on the technology. Some are focused on the physical facility. There's all these layers when we start talking about safety standards. So I think we just have to sometimes be very focused and what exactly we're talking about when we're saying we're going to address the safety standard and really targeting that piece of it, because it does go in a lot of ways.
Okay.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, but to be specific, I mean, ASTM doesn't deal with water quality. That's really the local health jurisdiction, right? I mean, it would be ridiculous for us to say it has to be this or that when everywhere is different. But that water quality thing is a huge issue, right, Wes? I mean, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And Sean,
and in the U.S., the CMAC, right?
Yeah. I mean, to have to lifeguard.
Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
To have to lifeguard that huge body of water, Sean, is a swimming pool. I mean, that's puts a lot more pressure on resources, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it absolutely does. So it's a big consideration just to make sure that it all flows, and it needs to make sense from an operator side as well.
Okay. As something like this comes up and we see regulation, ideally the industry self-regulates, where there are, we have this type of technology, we need this many lifeguards on this section of the pool. I'd like if you could speak to the differences in technologies, because Sean has a Wavegarden Cove at Urbansurf in Sydney and Melbourne. We have other wave pools opening up. There are so many different technologies going on out there, from the Perfect Swell to Endless Surf to Tom Lochtefeld's Palm Springs facility. How I'm curious, how do they do that? Do they do that by, if you're regulating a pool, is there like per square meter, you need this many lifeguards? How would regulations take shape to address the different technologies?
I think the answer to that is going to depend. There's going to be a lot of jurisdictional kind of insight and thoughts on this in certain areas. I think, though, as an industry, the type of tech is going to be part of the driving factor about what that lifeguarding and operational staffing plan looks like, based on the style. So I think about the work that we're doing with Waco Surf. They have a back wall that a lifeguard can have a great visual of the operation in front of them. However, they can't safely get into, leave that wall to perform a rescue as much as, so that it's the responding lifeguard is best positioned on the beach. And so it's really a combination effort in that technology, and then having additional staff and people that can respond to things. We think about, the pool at Palm Springs is I'm not going to say it's more traditional, like a wave pool with the walls on both sides to be able to have lifeguards responding. Waveguarding is different. Endless surf is different. Surf lakes is going to be very different. All of these technologies are very different. So I don't think there's a one size fit all approach, as much as we have to look at it as what, do they have sightline visibility? Do they have the ability, can they get to certain places in certain amounts of time and perform the care? One of the great things that a surf pool has versus the natural ocean is, you see this where a surfer has an accident, someone's in the water, they need help. You can't shut off the waves, right? in a natural body, but you can in these environments. Is it immediate? No, depending on the technology, there's different timing factors, but ultimately you can provide a level of response. But that's where it's so important that we don't look at like broad strokes over the industry, because what we do in standing waves, we're working with Fireside Surf in Dallas, and they have a city wave, standing wave tech. That is a very different, animal, if you will, than what we're going to see in a place like Urbansurf with the Wavegarden tech. And so I think it's that approach, but using those ability to recognize, respond, provide care, and meet those otherwise response standards. That's really what we're trying to do, and it's going to be very much a site specific aspects for all of these, because even some of the tech is going to be very different, or the same tech will be applied in different ways in different environments. And I don't know, Sean, if you guys see some of that, or if you potentially even have differences in how you're doing, say, Melbourne and Sydney, but I think we do see some of that.
Yeah, I would say like some of the standards we followed. So we've adapted some of the wave pool standards from Royal Lifeguarding, and it's more broad strokes of, they insist on one lifeguard per 40 swimmers. For us, we take it as 40 surfers. So we always look at, when we're lifeguarding, it's not just the person spotting it, but it's that whole sequence. If the worst had to happen, then what is the whole sequence of getting to a person and getting them the best care possible in as short amount of time as possible. So again, we've made hybrid standards ourselves, as we protect one lifeguard for 40 people. We have a minimum of 3 qualified people at all time on the lagoon. So if something happened, 3 people could attend to it. And we use a rescue board, a surf rescue board in the lagoon as well, to meet other standards where it is where the lifeguards needs to get to a certain place in the lagoon within a certain time frame. And for us, it's 20 seconds to identify, 40 seconds to get to the person. So I think if you take those broad strokes over all these different type technologies of surf lakes, endless, Wavegarden, all of it, if you take those broader strokes, you can slot those kind of standards into any one of those facilities, and it would still make sense, but it would also make sense from an operator point of view, where it's not excessive and it's not just way over the top.
Now that to get your numbers, the seconds, 20 seconds to 40 seconds for the different rescues, is that extrapolated from swimming pool standards, or did you come up with that?
I don't know. I mean, I've got a long. I've worked in water parks for a very long time, and these are just some of the standards in the industry that I've kind of built up. That there was a base for them, and people along the line is don't reinvent the wheel. There's some very smart people that have come through all the way through, and it's surf parks is a hybrid. So don't start from the beginning, but just take the best bits from each industry and kind of make it fit your facility.
Okay. I think one of the things we talk about the operation of a surf pool versus a traditional water park wave pool or other swimming environments is because of the controlled atmosphere and the controlled activity, there's a lot different operational aspect to it. But I don't want to say we don't have the same drowning risk, because drowning is, anytime there's water, there's always that drowning risk. But a lot of what we're seeing so far in surf pools isn't drowning situations as much as lifeguards are identifying injuries, a lot of athletic type injuries, things like we talk about fin cuts and dislocations and such. Drowning is absolutely something they're going to have to be aware of, especially as facilities incorporate more beginners or, the less advanced surfers, let's put it that way. But nonetheless, because of the controlled atmosphere, the surf guides, you have all these other layers that make it very unique to when you think about, your traditional wave pool really anywhere in the world, where it might have, hundreds, 1,000+ people in a tight space. And it's a very unique operating aspect. And I think that's one of the things that my conversations with Sean have been really impressed. And I know what we've done with others in this space. It's just a very different conversation than what we see in whether natural surfing surfing in natural environments or surfing or wave pools in a water park environment.
Okay. And Marshall, on your interpretation of this going into dynamic or traveling waves, do these applications with the timing and such sound about right as you bring it to the group to help set up standards?
Yeah, it's a spirited conversation to have when you start comparing swimming pools, body bobber, with water park wave pools, and then a surf basin or lagoon or pool, because there's a couple of aspects. One, there is no wave pool standard within ASTM for good reason, because it kind of crosses lines with swimming pool standards, and the goal is not to reinvent. It's more at ASTM to invent for something that's not already there. The other thing is because surfing is let's just call it a sporting activity. There are certain aspects that you don't want to have, like a traditional, and I'm thinking in California here, DOSH, you don't want them to assert traditional swimming pool / wave pool DOSH standards on, because like Sean just mentioned, or Wes, I can't remember, sorry about that, but people are going to get hurt doing high risk activities, airs, whatever, it's the nature of progression. So you're going to have injuries in that mode. It's like, how do you minimize that risk? Well, when people are going big, they're going to get hurt. They're going to land on their board or whatever. and that doesn't really meet any traditional swimming pool or body bobber standard, right? So we've purposely tried to, in ASTM, to make this more geared towards sport than recreation per se. And as such, we kind of work our way around that. Although there's certain pieces in here, like operational modes, where it talks about the designer engineer identifying different operational modes and circulation patterns, right? Because not all pools operate the same, as you mentioned, Brian. There are varying technologies, and that's also addressed. But overall, the goal has been to never mention it as a swimming pool. That's why I was curious about Sean's comment about, the Australian government asserting swimming pool lifeguard ratios to the pool, right? Because it's not like you have a bunch of people bobbing around with waves going over them and whatnot. Generally, the people are visible and up front and center. So that part of it, though, Brian, is still going to be like probably some kind of battleground in the future, as it goes forward in terms of swimming pool, wave pool versus surf activity pool, let's call it.
Well,
surfing activity.
So, yeah. So, Wes, you've had experience in different bodies of water and bringing safety to those different bodies of water. Do you, maybe you can explain for us how the safety process works, whether, from a jacuzzi to a surf lake facility?
Yeah. One of the things that Marshall was mentioning, that there's going to be a future conversations, at least, where we're, already hearing some of these venues that are potentially talking about using their pool for other things other than surfing. And so to simply create one operational plan that's always surfing, you have an amazing pool at a lot of these facilities that could be used doing all sorts of things. And, Palm Springs, they put these beautiful video screens and stuff behind. I mean, that venue could be amazing to do all sorts of other events and such. And we already see that in the water parks with wave pools and other venues where there's special events and this and that. And so when you do that, all of a sudden now you have to have different operational plans based on the types of activities that are occurring at it. And I'm sure you're going to see that as well for, certain plans for advanced surfing versus, beginning surfing versus, other layers of this. That it's going to be interesting. But to answer your question, there are very defined swimming pool guidelines in the industry, and really internationally they're used. And so if we're talking about a traditional swimming pool or lifeguarding it, our goal is a 30-second recognition and response standard. We're training lifeguards. We're setting them up where typically they can see everything. They always have to be able to see all parts of their zone, but typically they can scan that zone in about 10 seconds. But they can get to the furthest point in 20 seconds because there is science. There are statistics that show if we can see and identify and get to someone within 30 seconds, unless it's a medical event or something, that's all the care they're going to need, where that we can safely rescue them, get them to the side. If lifeguards can't see all parts of their zones, if it's taken us more than 30 seconds to get to them, now they're submerged, the drowning process begins. And then there's a lot of factors and things that happen at that point. And those kinds of applications are very site specific. You think about a water park activity pool versus a neighborhood or a traditional lap lane pool. Same basic concept of swimming, but very different application because of the activities, the size, the and everything. And so in surf venues, I think we're going to see is to Sean's point, instead of a 30-second standard, it's a 1 minute standard, but it's based on, sight lines and additional equipment response versus lifeguards, like we see in open water. You can use jet skis and other craft to get there to perform rescues. And swimming pools, we don't use those craft. We're jumping in, swimming. And so that's the way it's measured. So there's a lot of layers to this that are going to be really interesting to see happen. But I've already heard multiple projects where they're saying, yeah, we want to be able to host concerts, or we want to be able to do this or that. And, and I know I mentioned Palm Springs. They're not one of those that I've heard this from, but I have heard this from ones that are in development where they're talking about all these other things they want to do with it. And I just know it's going to be interesting conversation with the regulatory agency when you start saying, well, it's surfing here, but we're going to do this and do this. They like to think very black and white. There's one standard, one operational procedure. And so when you start going in ways, we're going to have to craft it very carefully.
So, let's talk about that as we as an industry come up with these standards. There's kind of this vague, there's the people, the entities creating standards, that I don't know whether that's the local city board, whether it's the International Water Lifeguarding. Who is the wave pool surf park industry up against in that context? What is the ceiling? What is keeping us from saying, hey, this works great, we're going to do it, we're going to implement it?
I mean, my answer to that is that it's really going to depend on the local jurisdiction, the local health departments and states and such. You know, some states have rides or attractions divisions, where in the U.S., in certain countries, it's very different. And there's some areas that are probably going to operate largely without a lot of regulation or oversight, and there's others that are very different. You know, in California, Marshall mentioned DOSH, but that department, they oversee a lot of the water park and water slide and roller coasters and such like that, and they have a lot of input on how operations are set up and the standards and such. Versus, you know, in some rural areas, you know, they may not have that. And I know in Sean's situation, they had very different standards in Australia they had to accommodate. And I'm sure like some of the European projects are even very different because, you know, so it just really depends a lot on that local jurisdiction and kind of who has oversight of it. I think some of these they're potentially being built in areas where there's going to be potentially very little of that. And they might have a little more creativity versus others. They're going to be very steadfast about, you got to do A, B, C, D, E, you know, a whole long list of things.
So so Sean, opening up Urbansurf Sydney, are you able, for the regulatory boards there, are you able to say, this is what we do in Melbourne? Is it okay if we do it here in Sydney? And they're okay with that?
They have been, and it's really who was the first one to put that signature on the paper on what we were. And now that somebody did it in Melbourne, kind of Sydney's followed and just do what you do in Melbourne. So there is like, as long as I wasn't the first one to put my name on a piece of paper, I'm happy somebody else had to. And there's that kind of thing. I would say, not being an American, what's happening in Australia right now, and it feels like, especially internationally, is every government agency is kind of waiting for America to adopt a standard, and then that will trickle through to the rest of the world. Is in the surf park space or an aquatic safety space, that's what they're looking like. And again, it's the whole, you can go various ways of why they're waiting for it, but they're waiting for somebody else to adopt the standard, and America is trusted to create the standard and let it flow through the rest of the world.
Okay, Marshall, would you agree? Would you agree with that?
Well, to a certain extent, yeah. I mean, I think you know, there's a number of reasons why having a standard is important. Whether it's adopted universally, I mean, you know, Europe has EN, US is very ASTM focused, plus it is global. But the most important thing is making sure that a designer, engineer slash manufacturer provides the right set of equipment, documentation, protocols, so that people don't get hurt, right? I mean, that's really what we're talking about. We don't want anybody getting hurt or dying. And so having something like that in place that can be used as a guide. I mean, I look at the ASTM standards as a manufacturer's guide to making sure that they have their processes buttoned up so that they don't open themselves up to future litigation. I mean, especially in the US, you know, so, I mean, and by the way, Sean and Wes, I mean, you guys are more than welcome to join the Stationary Wave Systems Committee, or the Surf Lagoon Committee. The next meeting is, by the way, on Valentine's Day in Tennessee.
I'll say it's like 2 weeks.
We hope to see you there.
You guys have to bring the donuts, though.
But it's no. I mean, the more the merrier, because we want to make sure that what we have in place is acceptable to operators, manufacturers, you know, lawyers, insurance people. I mean, everybody's got a dig in this game, you know. And I think that's really the key, is diverse opinions coming together to make sure that, you know, that the number one focus is patron safety. You know, that's it. So I think that's where we're headed.
You know, yeah, I think you hit on a really good point. We're all in that. There's a lot of different voices, and we all have that same common goal. You know, one of the things I think about in the U.S. when Crystal Lagoons came to the U.S., the first one that opened was Epperson Lagoon in near Tampa, Florida. And the health officials there essentially told the owner operator that we need to know how you're going to run this safely. And, basically, how are we not going to get in trouble for approving this? And so that we were contracted and wrote a life safety plan for them, and, just putting in some really basic measures, things that are used throughout, but putting it in a very custom way that was applicable to that lagoon, and then essentially did that for another lagoon. And then the state of Florida took those life safety plans and essentially used it as some of the framework for the regulation that was passed in the building code, and essentially is in place today. And then some of that was copied over to Texas and other jurisdictions as well for how to run these facilities. But I think that's kind of the goal, is that if we as a community can get out and provide some guidance and some standards and best practices and such, so that when the regulation comes, not if, but when it comes, there's some informed elements to it. They can look at the ASTM standards. They can look at, some of what we're doing, or what other organizations or other, health officials. The Aquatic Health Code has an ad hoc surf committee. All of these places they can kind of collect from the people doing it, and not just be left to their own devices to do whatever they think might be best. I hope that's kind of where we're going here.
What you just mentioned, the Aquatic Health Code, like, one of our fears was that we would overlap. And so, since there are some members on both, we just made sure we were not dealing with any water quality type issues, which is kind of what was their focus. And still, it's a huge issue, right? You're talking about huge bodies of water with these surf pools. And there's already been a few incidents, right? A few bad incidents. So it's something that definitely needs to be taken care of.
Okay. Well, and if they start having what Sean dealt with, where they come in and classify them as a pool and start with the turnover rates and the other filtration requirements and such, that's a considerable element that sometimes isn't discussed about, surf parks. And so we just have to make sure that, we're doing our best as an industry to educate those regulatory agencies and health officials and other people that are going to be involved in really dictating how these have to run. And Sean, I'm sure you guys have countered some of that from a water quality perspective for Melbourne.
Yeah. And again, it's just people are a little nervous to sign off something new. It's a brand new industry. And so they put us as a new round thing in a square hole, and that square hole was swimming pools. So it was a wide-eyed moment for us, and we had to scramble in Melbourne. We were prepared for it in Sydney, but there was a lot of scrambling that we weren't kind of ready for, and we had to adapt very quickly. So again, I think all these kind of struggles and everybody's kind of viewpoint on it is it's just going to help create the standard and this new regulations that everybody just, they know what to do, and local agencies can pull from these international guidelines to make more informed decisions, like you say.
Okay. Does anyone want to add anything? I think we're going to shift over to question time. We have a few questions. One from Paul, who pointed out that it's important to differentiate between standards and regulations, which I was a little fuzzy on going into it. So if you have standards which are self-made by the industry, our local jurisdictions and governments going to say, "Oh, this is great. You guys have these standards, so yeah, you're fine." Or will there always be, you think, some push and pull, like some communities, neighborhoods will be more, no, it must be this way. And have you had any experience with that?
Well, I don't.
I'd be curious to get Marshall's perspective on this.
Yeah. So my experience with it has been like DOSH related, and also the ASTM Model Aquatic Health Code perspective, where there was kind of like a line. There was a bifurcation between the two, and there was kind of like you guys work on the water quality perspective, and we'll work on, the mechanical, the equipment, the let's call it the safety training, the operator ingress, egress, safety signage, waivers, all that stuff. And so actually, I think it's worked out pretty well. Now, will we get pushback from well, I mean, we have DOSH on our committee, so they always bring the government perspective to it. And we've tried very hard in the ASTM standard to not have it classified as a swimming pool. With all due respect, Sean, that's the one thing we're trying to avoid.
No, I wish it wasn't, man. I really wish it wasn't. So I hear you.
But I think Wes brought up a good point as well, that a lot of these big bodies of water, when they're not pumping out waves, people might be bathing in them. So it's an interesting thing. I think really, time is going to tell. I mean, from a stationary wave perspective, I can tell you that, the stationary wave system standard has worked really well in dealing with agencies like DOSH and the DCA in New Jersey, which I think in the States are the two most, I'll just use the word diligent, a kind word to use for them, two most diligent agencies, and they seem to appreciate that type of relationship, whereas there's a standard and then they might have a perspective that you have to deal with. But only time will tell, Brian. I mean, it's like uncharted territory. So we'll just have to see what happens. But I mean, Sean's comment about the swimming pool thing very first, that just blew my mind. I mean, that's exactly what we were trying to avoid by creating a surf.
Okay.
Make Valentine's Day a good day for me, Marshall. Get it across the line.
But Marshall, you have seen that with when we're self-regulated within the stationary rapid wave segment, that and the various entities are more receptive to saying, yeah, you guys are doing it right. You know what you're doing. We accept this system you've set up.
And particularly because we have representatives from the DCA and DOSH on these committees. That's the beauty of it. They're part of the solution. So you're not banging your head up against the wall when you're dealing with them. Now, globally, I mean, we've got global representation. I mean, we've got two from, Germany and all kinds of different people involved. It's a pretty diverse group. So hoping that everybody's perspective is in the standard, that's the most important thing.
Okay, well, thank you. That's 46 minutes. We've gone into this, and we've covered quite a lot. I've learned heaps in just this short amount of time. I thought I knew a little going into it, but hopefully I know more now. I'm going to jump into questions coming through. One is from Simon, and he brings up the topic du jour, which is how about AI, and how might AI be incorporated in the future of aquatic safety. I know at Urbansurf, Flow State has set up a wonderful AI automated video camera system, which records your sessions and you can watch yourself surf. Do you know of any applications of AI at the moment regarding water safety?
I think Wes can talk to this better, but I will say we've just pulled some great data with Flow State on. Obviously, they record every wave surf that they can sell it to the surfers, but through that, the video also cuts when you fall off. So we've got all that data on people that didn't surf the entire wave and when exactly did the video cut off, meaning when did they fall off. So for every wave type we have, we've also got that X amount of people only surfed it for like 1 to 2 seconds, 2 to 3, all the way through to 20, 30 seconds onwards. So it's really quite interesting to see where people are falling off throughout, like if you just compound it month by month in which areas, which means that, again, there's a lot of operator things that you can do. Is the surf guides can be more informed in these specific areas, and our safety briefings can be adapted for each one of those wave types just by using the data of flow state, which has been absolutely amazing. And Wes, I know there's other advancements in AI for aquatic safety.
Yeah, so from a drowning detection standpoint, where AI has gotten to today and where it continues to advance literally every single day, it's pretty remarkable. It's the ability, some of these systems abilities to be able to, they're taking thousands and thousands of pictures and constantly, analyzing each of those pictures, and the technology is really good about determining swimmers when they're underwater, when they become unresponsive, all of these things. We have some partnerships, and one of them that's really fascinating. The technology can literally tell a difference between an inner tube, a bather when they're wearing a life jacket. Like it picks all these things up. But what that data is doing, or what that technology is doing, is essentially giving us data and alerts. And we're going to see it not just in surf venues, but really in all venues, especially swimming pools and stuff. Are we there today? No. Are we going to be there in 3 years, 5 years? Yeah, absolutely. I think we're going to see it come more and more a commonplace. Whether that becomes industry standards and ultimately regulations, time will tell. But yeah, the drowning detection piece of it is pretty remarkable. What the technology is doing. I think now we're getting really good at detecting, but we have to figure out, how do we alert? What's that next layer of prevention? Because the technology will identify, but obviously it won't rescue, it won't perform care, and so it's very much a layer of that risk prevention system. But I do think ultimately it's going to become more and more commonplace, within the next 5 years for sure, maybe sooner. But I'm pretty excited about it as an industry, because I think it's going to give us another layer of risk prevention that just can just be really dynamic and do a lot of good for aquatic venues everywhere.
That's really exciting, and especially that you can use it in a real case scenario at Urbansurf with flow state, and speak to the team and have it adjusted for that. So that's really cool.
It's really true.
As we wrap it up, would you like to add anything, Marshall, Sean, or Wes? Maybe something we missed, maybe looking toward the future, what a best case scenario for the industry, where we will go, what could happen that would make everything much easier. Let us spend Valentine's Day with our loved ones instead of attending a meeting. What would you like to see
I won't
happen?
be, but I just, the whole goal for this is just to make sure people are safe, relatively as safe as they can possibly be in any kind of environment like this. And I think that should be, like, if not the number one goal, at least should be at the very top of everybody's mind when creating the next widget. Because there's all kinds of different technologies already that we're trying to accommodate within any standard proposal. And who knows what the next technology will be. I mean, it's not done, right? So just so long as people are putting their hats on straight when they think about patron safety, that's, to me, I think that's just a critical thing, because that's the one thing that will hurt. It'll be extremely painful. So that would be.
I always like to remind people, and this is applicable in water parks and resorts and really any aquatic environment, but in surf parks, nobody has a greater interest in delivering a safe experience than the owner operator. And they are by and large going to do whatever they can. And so in water parks, we've seen where some of the self-regulation, the self-standards has actually driven to the facility or the industry to run really safely, because they're the businesses. They depend upon the perception of safety because everyone's concerned about it, and they want to know that they have their reputation, and people come there with confidence that it's going to be a safe experience. And I think we're going to see that same thing. We already are already seeing it in surf parks, but I think as the industry continues to develop, the owner operators are more invested than really anyone to make sure that the industry is safe, and they're going to be very receptive to a lot of what we're collectively trying to do. We come up with ideas, and we saw that in water parks, going back 40 years, and the evolution of water parks and where we've gotten to today. And I think we're going to see the same thing in surf industry.
And Sean, would you like to close out with anything?
Yeah, sure. And it's kind of answering Gene's question as well as complicated. It is true. Like it feels like surf parks are riding such a high at the moment. Like it's just such a great technology and advancement that the world is absolutely going nuts for it, and we all are riding this high. But I mean, as an operator, we're not only focused on our own safety, but we're really taking, as one of the first people to have a surf park, is taking the industry and kind of educating the industry as a whole, because we're all either going to make this industry really strong and like a household name that everybody has surfed in a surf park, or if there's just one or two things that go wrong, catastrophically wrong, it can really tarnish the whole industry's reputation. So if there are other owner operators out there, you're not in it alone. I would say there's a wealth of knowledge out there. There's people willing to help you to talk through some of their own experiences about it. And if you've made any significant learnings, I'd say, like, just jump on board. If you're listening to this, you're already a part of the solution. So the more noise, the more helpful we are to one another. There is no competition in safety. We all want the same thing, and let's just make this industry really good and practically safe. That it just makes sense for everyone involved.
All right on. Thank you, Sean. There's really good words, really good way to wrap it up. I want to thank everyone for joining us, the members of the audience, as well as our guest panel, Marshall Merriman, Wes Long, and Sean Hutchinson. Thank you. We've crossed, I think, 4 time zones here, and everyone made it. The show is called Wave Pool Mag Friday Sessions, and it's Thursday in much of the world, but for Sean, it is Friday.
Thank you for accommodating.
Happy Fridays.